why I stopped listening to music working out and what I do instead. What I do instead is listening to nothing. Now, I want to explain, first of all, how I began with working out, then go through how I used music, and now why I decided I no longer am using music and how this is working out. So I began working out at age 12 on my kind of own devices, I think the proper phrase is. And so at this age I started strength training as well as running. Now, initially I often would listen to music. Back then also it was very difficult to listen to music running because, well, at this time the phones were not really that good, and so it was actually not that easy. So I sometimes kept an MP3 player with me, but sometimes I also didn't. I also had this idea of when working out I needed to be this ultra version of myself that ran super fast and so on and so forth. And over the years I now, it's not that this changed so much, it is just that things have changed. So first of all, I think it makes sense to now draw the bigger picture, paint the bigger picture of what music might do to working out. Working out is hard. So if the workout itself is hard, one can do potentially things that make it easier, such as drinking caffeine before, such as something else. And so if one does additional things now that basically make it easier, then the workout becomes easier. Now the question is what one wants to optimize for. In now the last couple of years I decided to not optimize any longer for basically the one ideal workout, but I wanted to optimize for being able to work out with as low as a threshold as I possibly can. And so what if your headphones aren't working? What if your music playlist is not optimal? What if you so what happened partially is that every now and then I basically ran out of the dopamine inducing effect of music. So I would have to have to schedule basically music, going through new music every now and then, just in order to keep the flow, just in order to keep basically the dopamine flowing for my productivity, which I also used music for, but also for working out. So eventually I figured this was, first of all, a time-consuming activity. Second of all, I also wanted to kind of create my own music, and so I didn't want to expose myself too much to music all the time, because then my mind would rather copy the things that I heard compared to coming up with their own ideas. Only maybe if I listened to very much music, then it would also kind of synergize what it had heard before. And the last thing is that also something happened. So first of all, initially I had MP3 files, and I listened to them on my Sony Ericsson or on my MP3 player back then. Then I kind of transitioned over to Spotify. Spotify seemed to be the best music streaming service. Now, initially I would listen on the free version, eventually I would pay for it, and then Spotify changed. Why did Spotify change? Why did Spotify change, and how did it change? So Spotify, I think, wanted to become kind of more a social media platform. It also introduced audiobooks and other things, or the audiobooks already were there, I just didn't really use them. Then also podcasts. If then you already have podcasts, and you also have the ability to kind of have something that would be a YouTube channel, but is available as a podcast, then for me that would mean that I could no longer use my music app, in this case Spotify, for productivity. Now, because if I open the app, I expose myself to basically the incentive structure of the app, which seems to be the goal of the app seems to be then similar to other social media apps, which then try to basically get time from me, which I cannot really opt in if I actually want to be productive. I mean, at the end of the day, I want to use my time, and if music then is basically a thing that takes away from this time, because I have to open up Spotify, and Spotify now tries to basically introduce me to new things all the time, then I can no longer use it. So eventually I decided to completely stop listening to at least music on Spotify. And because it was so hard now again to have MP3 files and synchronize them across my devices and so on and so forth, I actually also had another idea, because so first of all I wanted to also track my workouts. In order to track my workouts, I would need some device. Ideally, it would not be me having to have a notepad or something like this, because then my handwriting and also and also I would have to digitize it anyway, so there would be the time spent during the workout, but also then after the workout, and this was just kind of too much time. I tried having an Excel open on my phone for tracking strength training, but this just took away time from my workouts, and it also reduced the cardiovascular benefit from my workout if I just added this many pauses in between the sets. And what I also found is that if I work out, then I need to be working out. I can only work out for so long until my mind starts to drain, and also my body energy starts to drain already, and so I need to get this done, and I don't get it done if I have my phone, because then I'm again exposing myself to basically all the different apps that are meant to not meant, but they seem to be optimized often for basically taking away my time, which I cannot really allow during the workouts, at least during the workouts, if not for longer periods of the day. Now, of course, there are blocking apps and so on and so forth, but then why not just not be subscribed to Spotify? Now, I then had the problem. What do I do now? So I didn't have Spotify any longer. I figured about just listening and using my own music, which I haven't built up that much, but it would be an opportunity at least also to kind of go more into actually music production, because then I would actually have a reason for the music, because if I just make the thing I actually want to listen to anyway, then I need to make the thing, and this would also be a nice incentive in terms of creating music. Now, I had this intermediary phase in which I thought, I need to have my workouts tracked ideally on a smartwatch. I did try this. I did try an app called Fitbot, which also had at this point already a Galaxy app, so not a Galaxy but a Galaxy smartwatch app, but it didn't work that well. And also the Spotify app on the Galaxy Watch Active 2 and then also on the Galaxy Watch 4 were just non-usable basically. Opening them up and then 45 seconds of waiting just for the app to open up, it was just not something that was working in any reasonable manner. So eventually I decided to, what if I just don't listen to music? Now, of course, I would then expect, at least initially, that my workouts were way less efficient. And now over time, I have to say, so I stopped listening to music. During my strength training workouts, I already previously began listening or stopped listening to to music on runs. First of all, when sprinting, when doing interval training, it is really hard to basically move. Second of all, the tips that are made out of rubber and sweat don't really like each other. So as soon as you begin to sweat, they kind of seal, and then you have this effect where you sometimes have something on. Basically, you have environmental sounds, sometimes you don't, and then you basically have this thing where it switches all the time, and it is kind of annoying. Now, previously already, when wireless headphones did not really exist, or they did exist maybe, but only with not Bluetooth, I often just used wired headphones, and then you have to carry your phone or your MP3 player somewhere, and then it constantly tugs, and then you go through 3-4 different Bluetooth headsets, not Bluetooth, but normal headsets, wired headsets, and none of them work properly, and then the cables constantly, and then there begins to be a lack of contact, such that sometimes the music does not work. So, back to the smartwatch thing. I tried to begin to track my workouts. I then also tried tracking my workouts on my phone with an app called Strong. After I tracked them a little bit with Fitbot, or I at least tried the app, I never subscribed to it. Also, at this time already, Garmin watches existed, Polar watches already existed. I actually tracked my runs at age 15. I began tracking my runs, but I didn't have GPS on this watch because I couldn't afford the GPS version of the watch, so I only had heart rate data, which was not that useful. Retrospectively, it is still data, but nonetheless, I don't even know how fast I was running, which one could argue is kind of the main data point one could get possibly from running. So, as the music on the watch did not work, on the Galaxy Watch back then, and also I couldn't track my workouts on my watch, I decided two things. First of all, I stopped tracking the workouts, and I decided, I then tried with the phone, but I noticed again, if I have my phone in my workout, and at this time already I began working out at a gym, but in a gym it's better actually, in terms of the incentive structure, because there are other people around you. And if you are sitting around, at least I feel like a lazy, I don't know, if I just sit around, because then everybody else also knows that I'm not working out hard. And this is something that seems to drive me at least quite a bit, which is very useful, at least in terms of going to the gym. This social pressure to work out seems to drive me to work out harder, and therefore ideally optimizes my progress also in the gym. Now with running, it is kind of similar, because running often occurs in outdoors, and you might at least meet people, at least if you don't live on the countryside and you only meet like 1 or 2 people, and also depends on the running times, obviously. But if you're passing someone, then you don't want to look like you barely can run, and then basically, in my mind at least, have the breathing rate and how stressed I look versus how fast I run, and that's kind of how I at least assess other people's running ability, even though I think that other people do this too. A theory of mindly, there is no adjective for this, but in terms of this, I think that other people do this too, and maybe they don't. Maybe everybody just cares about themselves. Now, back to strong. So I tried tracking with my phone. I noticed that my phone reduces the intensity of my workouts. I did not want this, and I decided I would stop using my phone, which meant that I would track my workouts afterwards. I at least try to remember, so I basically created different workout plans, and then I tried to remember the sets and also the weight, because the overall plan was usually kind of the same, so I had to remember the sets as well as the number of repetitions. And sometimes I would change, and sometimes this was occupied, and this made it quite difficult, and also I never really trusted that data. Now, currently, in terms of tracking, I am using now a Garmin watch, and that the exercise selection is not that great. Nonetheless, I now have kind of a workflow that seems to somewhat run well, and I began tracking my workouts during the workout, basically the weight as well as the reps on my Garmin watch now. Now, back to the music component. In the last years now, because I needed, so obviously there is also, Spotify also costs something, and there is also a time cost to either using Spotify additionally or managing basically the library. I do still have a little bit of MP3 files here and there, but basically they are not as, there are just a few. And so if I would just listen to the same songs again and again, they would also become numb over time, or I would become numb to the stimulus they would otherwise drive. So now, because I stopped listening to music during the workouts, I already had stopped during running, mostly because of the issues, and also when sprinting. I did interval training maybe beginning at age 14, 15, 16, where I would sprint and then pause again, sprint and pause again. And there it was already kind of impractical. For quite some time I also used headsets, and so Bluetooth headsets, and they would also be quite nice for running. But then you also have the problem that I had the problem that the phones just got larger and larger and larger. So initially I had a HTC Desire X, which was quite small. Also the MP3 player was quite small, but then I began tracking GPS data with at least the Desire X. But then as soon as the phones get as big as this, it's like, where do you put the phone? I could put it on my upper arm, but like for years I basically kind of procrastinated on purchasing something like this. And then there was also the thing that, so I procrastinated on purchasing something like this because obviously there is a cost associated to this, and there would be like hundreds of other things, or 250 other things like this that I would then also buy kind of in the same category. So I just didn't buy it. Now, what I now have actually something like this. I did try listening to podcasts, and maybe actually mostly to books and podcasts in the last couple of months while running, especially since I began to run longer runs. But on the shorter runs, there is just, and the same is true for other cardiovascular workouts as well. There seems to be a certain limitation to how much I am computing basically on a single time. So basically per unit of time I do have a maximum output in terms of my mental control ability, in terms of just the mental power. The same is true for the physical power. Now, if I additionally listen to something, some of the compute using basically the large language model language and terms for now basically the comparison or analogies to the human body. Now, if I use some of the compute for controlling, so if I have 100% compute and I don't listen to anything, then I can control my body with 100% compute. And there might also thoughts that come up. Recently, for example, I have been on the assault bike, and I just thought through things because I had been thinking all day long, and so I just continued to think. And actually was quite helpful. What I often find also helpful is to already have something before, because if I wake up and I don't do something right away, then basically the first few things are in working memory, and because I have to remember them, I have to remember afterwards, and I cannot put them right down. I basically cannot begin the computation of how to process or how to begin the process with these tasks, basically. And so what I noticed is that I usually want to have at least like 1 or 2 hours before going into a cardiovascular workout where I already begin to process these things. Now, in addition, if I have basically 100%, and I did basically the A/B testing a couple of times where I would try to listen to podcasts. I listened to Huberman Lab, I also listened to books, while at least doing the 40 minutes of assault biking, which now is more not 40 minutes any longer. It used to be 43 minutes for the 500 kilocalories, at least as shown on the assault bike, even though the Garmin watch often shows me more calories burned. Now, for this period, which would be, it's already standardized. I would just have to additionally bring my phone. I already have I do have Galaxy Buds, which I then can use. So I did test this a couple of times, and because I had this high standard of assault biking, and because this is also so fairly standardized, the gym is always, of course, sometimes it's cooler, sometimes it's hotter in there. But if it's kind of the same time, if I'm kind of otherwise the same, then I can, from a week-to-week basis, compare kind of my cardiovascular ability, because the assault bike is always the same. So I do have kind of a real-life measure that is as good as I possibly can get it. It's not like a run, where sometimes it's like wind into this direction, sometimes it's into this direction, sometimes a car drives over the street, and then you need to cross there. And on the assault bike, I just go on there, I start, and as soon as I hit 500 calories, which then is also an external measure, it's not internal calories, it's basically external power output. So basically the joules are converted into calories, which then means that the assault bike needs to have recorded basically the 500 calories. So on this assault bike, I then tried listening to Huberman Lab as well as books. And what I noticed is that I am just not able to control my body that much. So basically, if my intensity maybe goes up and down and up and down, the amplitude of the intensity that is above zero just is reduced if I additionally listen to something. And so what is the main purpose of training? It's to increase basically or keep my body's abilities. And so if I now use this and listen to podcasts, and I also tried sometimes listening to podcasts while strength training, but it turns out it was not a good idea, because I need to be able to basically increase the intensity. I need basically some computation at any given point in time during the workout to basically try to push as hard as I possibly can. Now, often there might also be some reason that I try to not basically push as hard as I possibly can, but at least kind of I need the controlling ability, so basically the processing power that otherwise would go to basically computing or processing the audio input. I need this in order to improve what I'm actually doing. And so the rule I also have is that I try to, if the audio input, whether this is in this case mostly verbal input, so this could be podcast or books, and if this is reducing the effectiveness of, or in this case rather the efficiency of the main task, the primary task which I'm using the time for, by more than 10%, then I should stop listening to this. So if I'm, for example, cleaning up my apartment, and I notice that I now need to switch to tidying up my apartment, then I often stop just the playback, because I just need to think about, okay, what do I actually need to organize? Do I need to pack my bag, and so on and so forth? And then I just don't listen to the audio, and then I also don't process, and then it doesn't make sense to listen to the book. One could make the argument, if I just wanted to increase my book count, which is also an incentive I have, or an incentive structure I have set up, that it will sometimes make sense to nonetheless continue to listen, and also if one wants to just get through to a book, but I try to avoid going into the habit of not listening to the book, so not actively listening to the book I'm actually listening to, because then why read books? So I want to have the association clean. And now the same is kind of true also for the gym. Now, let's imagine I am traveling somewhere, and then my phone battery dies, and also, or maybe there's an issue with Spotify or something like this. There is also basically this additional argument, which is that I am just more flexible. If I don't need this exact playlist, then I basically reduce the constraints on the workout, because I just need to be able to at least basically listen to the sound of my brain to a certain extent, which I can listen to if I have earplugs in and I put them in like very tight. What has kind of occurred in the last couple of months to years at this point in time already is that my brain makes sounds. This sounds now ridiculous, but I can. And also this might just be correlations. So there might be phases in which my stomach, for example, is louder, and basically there is more movement, or there is more outside external stimuli that are basically covering up the otherwise audible brain noise. But I think it is mostly the blood flow which I'm listening to, and so I can kind of hear now. I can, if I have my earplugs in, because now when I'm working out, in my mind I'm kind of working. I see this kind of as work, because it is something that I need to do, and I need to get it done as efficiently as possible. So it's the same if I'm working or studying, and so on and so forth. So these are kind of the two of the same things. The same is kind of true, or the same kind of mindset applies also for sleeping. So I also wear earbuds while sleeping. Now, there are also these two versions, so recently I listened to the book. Actually, I listened to it the second time already, by Daniel Z. Lieberman, and he wrote the book called a book called The Dopamine, the Molecule of More. And so in this book he describes kind of the two general archetypes. First of all, the general archetypes kind of the mind state, or the states the body can be in. The first one is the dopaminergic state, which is focused on basically driving forward into the future and also up. The second one would be the H and N circuits, so there are kind of different systems that relate to both of these. So H and N hormones or neurotransmitters would be serotonin, would be oxytocin, and maybe a couple of other ones. Whereas the dopaminergic neurotransmitters in this case are mostly dopamine, maybe also adrenaline, maybe also cortisol to a certain extent, but they are basically driving forward into the future, trying to prepare basically for a better tomorrow. I actually had this idea as of today, also because the US elections are coming up, that if dopamine would be running for president, then it would have the slogan like "for a better future," which I found quite funny. Now, back to the H and N. So the H and N, to a certain extent, is also what I think I need to be able to access, but I often cannot access. There seems to be this kind of thing going on where I want to be social, and which seems to mostly correlate with H and N in my case. And this is now something I have thought about for years. Why is it that sometimes I'm like not interested in social interaction at all, and I just think about all these things that I need to do, because otherwise the future will be terrible, or it won't be better. So there are kind of these two sides, I think, to the dopaminergic side, which are kind of the future will be worse if you don't do this, so much more stress-driven, cortisol-driven, and the other is the much more positive, which is that the future will be better if just I do this now, and I could also do this, and I need to do this, and I need to do this. So basically the positive as well as the negative sides of preparing for a better future. Now, in terms of accessing H and N, now the simplification I now have is that in the gym, for example, I just wear a cap. And the same is also true for usually doing work. So now with making videos, it's kind of different. And this is also, I think, while I partially struggle often to actually be concise and also precise when making videos, because I'm accessing basically the H and N version of me too much. Because I begin to now, in the last couple of months, I did this more and more. And I also wore caps now for the last decade or so. Also for this purpose. So there seems to be some evidence, and also Andrew Huberman mentioned this in his episode, in one of the first episodes on work environments, that shrinking the visual field down seems to allow for more precise tasks that are basically not so much creative tasks, but more like, okay, I need to now fill out an Excel spreadsheet or something like this. So basically narrowing the field, the visual field. Now, I don't know if there are any studies on this. Nonetheless, I also used this now maybe 10 years before I heard this on Huberman Lab. And so I I seem to just be more focused, and I also can avoid basically kind of more social interactions to a certain extent at least, because I just don't see as many people. And also in the gym it seems to be somewhat beneficial, because if there are 10 people that you possibly could interact with because you already spoke to them before, and some of them might be your friends, then there is always kind of a trade-off to, am I now social, or do I now actually care about going to the workout, especially sometimes if you're very time constrained. And so the problem is also that the accumulating benefit, cardiovascularly speaking, of doing the next set and the next set and the next set also begins to drop, which I then can see showing up in my data, in this case my Garmin load, which then over the course of several months might mean that my HRV might go higher, which is good, but my cardio score might go lower, my VO2 max estimate begins to drop, and so on and so forth. So overall, there are these compounding effects, and I think I am kind of, at least in this version of myself, I see myself as kind of the architect of these long-term things, and so I need to make sure that I consider these different variables. One of these variables is whether I listen to music or not. Now, in terms of a constraint now, music has the constraint that I need a device which plays back the music. Now, because I made music for many years, I actually can sometimes listen to music without, or to a certain extent at least, have songs play in my head which actually are not basically externally playing, because I just listen to a rhythm kind of without basically listening externally to music. So for example, I a couple of years ago watched the movie Birdman, and for the next couple of months I just had this drum rhythm in my head. I also listened to these tracks quite a few times, and so sometimes also with workouts I just am synchronizing to the rhythm. There might also be in the gym music anyway, so if I have my earplugs in, I might still kind of hear the bass, and then I often just find myself synchronizing my steps with, and also my repetitions with the music that is running, which then of course has the influence that what if the BPM is higher or lower on a given day, does this increase or decrease the intensity and also the execution, and so on and so forth. Now, if I want a workout that is always phone free, and I noticed I can probably count hundreds of times where I was in the workout and I just procrastinated, and even if I'm sometimes working out at home, I then want to start the workout on my phone. Sometimes I do these. The problem is, if I cannot access the equipment at the gym, then I still haven't found a really good routine that is like here, and now I do this. Now recently I began kind of planning workouts like these. I call them the hotel workout, and I planned a workout like this on the Garmin ecosystem, which now means I have them on my Garmin watch, and I could potentially kind of execute them just like I would in the gym, which kind of would lower the threshold, because I don't need to think about also the program at the same time as executing the program. Basically the short-term version of me has to do less processing, and so has less responsibility, because the thing is already set up by long-term me. Now, in terms of having then the phone in such situations in the workout, it's just always a bad idea in my experience. I just then am on the phone, and then I realize, I need to really research this. For example, I tried taking pictures of the assault bike display after the run. Not after the run, but after assault biking. And what happened is that eventually I just was on the assault bike, and the assault bike has these handles, which are obviously in order to transmit more power to the assault bike compared to a normal biking or indoor bike. Now, with the phone, I eventually began searching for, how can I connect via Bluetooth to the assault bike, and I just was not pedaling with my hands, which obviously is not the purpose of the workout. And this was only just a couple of weeks ago. So I did the experiment with only on the assault bike listening to podcasts and music. I also did the experiment with kind of longer runs, which have less the requirement of the intensity, or less of an intensity requirement, with having my phone mounted on basically my upper arm. But then I also jump into the river afterwards, and then there's also the risk that someone steals my phone, and also it might get wet, and so on and so forth. There is also another idea, and this idea again jumps into the same direction, or goes into the same direction as the same with the wired headphones. What if the headphones don't have battery? What if the phone doesn't have battery? And so on and so forth. It is to make the workout itself as simple as possible. So if I only need a tank top, shorts, maybe my cap, my earplugs, and ideally shoes, then I can work out basically wherever. Now, if I additionally have gym memberships, maybe at all gyms worldwide, this would be very nice, but of course this is something I, at least at this point in time, I don't have. In Europe, by the way, there seems to be a company which tries to make something like this come true, like a flat rate, and I also looked something like this up for the last couple of years, because this is really a problem. If I'm going somewhere and there is no gym, then this reduces either the intensity, but also the execution, but also the likelihood that I actually work out quite a bit. And so this has always been a problem when, for example, traveling through Europe a bit, then do I work out in the hotel, and then there is this bunk bed, and then I make these pull-ups there, and it's just ridiculous because you feel ridiculous because nobody else is working out, and sometimes you try to then get other people to work out too, to not feel that awkward, but then it's a problem. And ideally I would want access to a gym like this, but then I only need a few things, and so it needs to be as simple as possible, and therefore if I don't need this additional thing called music, then, and I'm also able consistently, I think it's consistently, to work out without music, then I'm basically a better version of myself, because I'm a more flexible version of myself. Basically, over the next couple of years, for the rest of my life, if I take a look at all the workouts I potentially would be doing, if I add the external constraint now of having to have music that I also want to listen to, and I remove this constraint, then basically all of these workouts increase in likelihood of happening, but they also increase probably in intensity, because I can use more computation for actually controlling the workout. Also, maybe noticing my form, maybe then trying to redesign the workout such that, okay, this set is followed by this. For example, currently I do deadlift, and then before the deadlift I actually have a set of squats which might interfere with each other to quite a bit, so I might already think during the workout about this. I also have this idea about automation, automating basically parts to the parts of everyday life to more and more the subconscious, which then would allow me to actually use more of my brain power during the day in these things I need to repeat anyway all the time, such as working out on a, in my case, currently daily basis. Then I can actually use more of the available time. So think of all the days in the future. If I say I have 10,000 days left, then if I am able to think in the 30 to 40 minutes of the workouts just a little bit more, just 1 minute more, just 10 minutes more, or in these 10 minutes just 10% more, or something like this, then the amount of thoughts I am able to execute and the amount of things I'm able to think about in the future just increases. And I'm basically, these are all the workouts, and I basically now layer on top of this all this just a little bit of more time to think, because I do the same sets and the same plan again and again and again, and I don't need to also additionally spend time scrolling through my phone and listening to music, and then I'm exposing myself also to everybody who has already apps which I downloaded on my phone, and therefore tries to get my attention or tries to get to pay me for things, and so on and so forth. If I just cut this out by not listening to music, then I'm potentially also increasing the amount of time that is left for me to think until I die. And so this has been this idea of not listening to music. So in terms of the rest of the week, if I'm swimming, I cannot listen to music anyway, and this was also true in the past. I often noticed during swimming that it was just kind of a very calming experience. The movement, as well as also the physical sensation, and also trying to listen to the body, which sounds kind of weird, but at the end of the day, the body wants to transmit data. Emotion, for example, is data transmission, one could say, that is very compressed. So as it is very compressed, but nonetheless the compression needs to happen because there's actually so much going on. And what if you have a vitamin D deficiency or something like this? How does your body transmit this to you? And not only transmit this to you, it's like, what if the body tells me, okay, last Saturday I had a vitamin D deficiency of like 12%. So like, what do I do now? And so by listening to the body, and by potentially listening to the body in a way that maybe allows for interpreting these hunger cues, for example, better, then the body is, in my case at least, seemingly somewhat able to stir me towards the foods I kind of taught it by eating them again and again and again. So if I have, for example, a selection of foods, then my body can stir me towards these. The same would be true for the workout. If I am covering I'm basically muting the signal of my body's or system 1's communication with system 2, which I would consider as me, by adding an additional external stimuli. And so the more I am able to listen to system 1, the more I can actually use this data in order to basically do my workout kind of better. I can, for example, feel into whatever muscle is currently having problems, and can kind of feel during the execution how much reps probably would kind of drive me towards, okay, this might be a micro tear, or it might be a bigger tear. For example, recently I had a increasing pain in my left leg when doing deadlifts, and so I just began to kind of notice this, and I stopped before, because in the past I often didn't stop before. I had pain, and I thought I needed to go through, because everybody needs to work out this hard, and I need to work out this hard because I didn't see that many results during my teenage years. So I just often would push through, and then for the next 8 weeks my elbow would be in a position where I couldn't curl, I couldn't do deadlift, I didn't deadlift back then, I couldn't do bench press, and so on and so forth, because I didn't consider these signals very well. And so basically I'm also allowing my body to communicate better during the workouts, which is kind of crucial, especially also when I'm sprinting, for example. There might be in a partial of a second, there might be information about my left leg, for example, whether it is now about to tip over into some direction, and I could possibly basically use the data in order to then stop or drive a little bit less of an intensity basically towards my system 1, or demand less of an intensity towards my system 1. Now, in terms of practicalities, I, in all of my pants now, have basically things like these, which there is a brand that is called Oropax, but these are just the standard things. Now I have them in black. I actually would prefer them in black, but nonetheless the ones I use are actually in yellow. But the black would cover up basically, I throw them in the washing machine, but nonetheless the black version would be kind of would cover up the fact that you are using things that not everybody has in their ears, so they look kind of more like earbuds. And there are actually also things that sell that are also looking like earbuds, but then I cannot just throw them into the washing machine. So what I do is I have at least 2 pairs of these in mostly every back pocket of pants. Now they often fall out. I haven't found a perfect solution. There is this coin pocket, which I also have some in, and I often, at least in jeans, also use this. Nonetheless, I think it is easier to just grab in the back, because here it is often just not that practical. In terms of working out now with these, I always try to wear the same shorts. In winter I do have tights, which I wear underneath my shorts, or I run still with the shorts in order to basically leverage it as cold exposure if this is possible. And also if there is no big risk of me then waiting 3 hours outside in the cold with shorts. So I have shorts which have zipper pockets, which is kind of crucial, because if I then wash them, and I can just zip them up, I leave basically the earbuds in there, and then they get washed automatically kind of, and so I don't need to think about them too much. I just grab them. Now in terms of normal pockets, it's a little bit more difficult, because normal pants don't have zippers, and I try to dress in a way that is kind of as universal as possible, so I don't have cargo pants or something like this which would have zippers. But in terms of working out, I just grab basically, of course there needs to be a resupply of these, and I also have many of them, but so these are actually the other ones, but I just keep them basically in my pocket, and because I keep them in my pocket, I then have access to them, and then these are basically the earbuds, and that's the music I just need to listen to. In addition now, so let's just summarize. So first of all, I listen to music, I use the external stimuli. I then became kind of dependent on, okay, now I wait for this drop, and for the next set of bench press I need to wait for the drop of the music, but then there is a kind of another phrase of music, or it just takes a little bit longer, and then I wait for the music, and I'm not working out. So basically I'm to a certain extent dependent on the music. Then there has been this issue with Spotify, and Spotify becoming more and more of a social media app. I also tried tracking my workouts, specifically the strength training workouts, and so I took a look at the watch. I also took a look at tracking with the phone, but I soon realized the watch was basically too slow at this point in time and too incapable, and the phone just distracted me from the workouts. I then decided to cut it out. So I quit my Spotify subscription. I still have hundreds of playlists with 10,000s or 30,000s of songs. I also try to automate parts of it, of the basically new updating playlists, because there are kind of features in Spotify that would make something like this, and I also used something like this. But then you don't have Wi-Fi, then you need to... In basically the previous home gym, I didn't often have a good Wi-Fi connection, and then I often used mobile data for it, which then again increases the cost. So there were many issues associated with this, and the obvious answer was to just cut the music entirely out. What I've now found in the last couple of months, so this has been 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago, and also so months and years in this case, months and years, is that my brain actually kind of makes sounds anyway. Now, and my body also wants to transmit information. I can use this now information that is now additionally present, and in order to kind of stir myself into better things in the future. So I can listen to the sound of my brain, and so if my brain has woken up, for example, then I often can hear the blood, I think, but it often sounds a little bit different, and also there are some other, so kind of how my brain feels. And then I can basically, based on this, I can make an assumption whether I should now maybe take a 10-minute nap, whether I should go for a walk maybe, or whether I should just continue, because my brain is in a state where I probably can work now for the next 40, 50, 60 minutes, and now I have energy and I need to use it now. I also use this more and more to let my body dictate when I'm actually going on a sprint run, for example, which in my case often lasts 10 minutes. I began adding these. Now, of course, there is the argument of circadian optimization based on external time, which then would mean that if I don't teach my body that at 6 a.m. in the morning I should do a sprint, and then it kind of prepares me for this anyway, but I try to listen to my body the whole time, and everything is fluctuating, and I cannot really plan my workouts, and also my body does not know what to optimize for. I now also think it is easier to distinguish at least so there have been two versions of me. I always thought of myself as kind of two versions. The one version was the kind of social going out version that actually enjoyed also social conversation, and there was this other version that also sometimes was present in social environments that just was like, okay, I need to do this and this and this right now, and this can't be happening, and I can't use my time right now for this and this and this, and I can't be here. I'm sitting here and I'm talking with these people, and these people talking about this, but I need to do these things. So there often has been a mismatch. That's what I'm trying to say. So I began also to, in the last couple of years, also with the music, to basically create associations, certain associations with the work version of me, the dopaminergic version of me, and also the H&N version of me. So what I've also tried now in the last couple of months is that so basically when I'm working out, I'm wearing the cap. I also do have my earplugs in. So I cannot really listen to what other people are saying, at least in this case now, specifically in the gym. But then I also do stretching in the gym, and so during stretching I now began to kind of allow myself, even though this already kind of pollutes the otherwise very clean work association with the gym, but also I had this need in me to socialize with the people in the gym, because, well, these are people that are also working out, so they already went through a kind of a similar filter compared to me, and so they would also be interesting to talk to, obviously, and it's ridiculous, I know. Nonetheless, I found this so hard because I had this high standard I wanted to have in terms of working out, but then also I needed to stretch at the gym because I also don't want to stretch at home. I also don't have equipment for stretching at home. So what now music and not music, or rather earbuds or not earbuds, has allowed me to do is to basically distinguish these two versions, maybe also signal to other people. So if you see somebody in the gym who has headphones on, then they are trying to get their workout done. And if you see somebody who doesn't have headphones on, then at least you can kind of speak to them, and they at least will hear it without the required steps of taking out their earbuds or their headphones. Now, I did actually think about maybe also having kind of a signal like this, but then I want to keep my things very I want to keep the things I use on a daily basis minimal in terms of the volume, also in terms of the packing volume. And if I just would carry Bluetooth headsets just for the sake of signaling to others, this would again be too weird, I think. So now I'm wearing these when I'm working out. If I take them out, also I notice it's a day and night difference in terms of how intense I work out. I allow myself sometimes on certain workouts of the week to take them out, but usually I try to take them not out during the workout. I try to get through the workout. I also time my workouts, and also I would usually cut it off after 35 minutes or after 40 minutes, or even by external time, so not the duration, but actually, so I start right now, for example, let's say it's 12 a.m., obviously not a workout time, and then I would have 1 hour to finish the workout, or maybe I would even have to finish the workout at minute 50, and after it, if I didn't make this workout, if I didn't have my things packed, then the workout time is just gone, because time is constrained anyway. And so if I just don't use the time, then I don't use the time. And so at least in these very specific things, I try to make or schedule my workouts as tight as I possibly could in order to drive intensity, also in order to have the sense of urgency actually implemented in my day-to-day life. Now, with the earbuds, I can distinguish between these two versions of myself, the working version of myself, the dopaminergic version of myself that does the working out. I also can think about things if I further automate basically things to my subconscious, and I can also listen more to kind of my subconscious whenever it tells me something in terms of pain or through pain or through other signals. I then can listen to more readily because I don't have an external stimuli that is music layered on top of this. And in addition, then in stretching or maybe afterwards, I then take them out, and then it's also kind of a change. It's almost like, well, it's a different sound environment from the dampened down sound environment that is often just the sounds, but of course you often hear external sounds nonetheless, to, okay, now I'm in a social environment, so it's kind of a plugging in and out of the social world, which I found also fairly useful. Now, I also found often using them in traffic, kind of to just protect my ears when I'm riding with a bike somewhere or when I'm walking, which then often is problematic because, well, I'm actually not really in work mode if I'm driving somewhere with the bike. It's more like a relaxed H&N mode, I would say. And this would also allow for more pauses in between. I also have been thinking about the pausing of the stretching. So if I don't have... So I would work out and then stretch 10 minutes afterwards, at least if it's in the gym. And so then I layered things on top of this, like assault biking for 1 minute, also on strength training workouts, just to have something additionally cardiovascularly that is like at least a one short anaerobic burst in a given day. Now, if I did this at the end of the stretching, which I usually did, then I was kind of quite out of breath, or not out of breath, but at least kind of cardiovascularly done, and also my legs would well be done for at least a couple of seconds. And if I then just continued, because the stretching now also became kind of part of the program, and I just went to the changing rooms, to the showers, and I didn't stop, then I would eventually often crash afterwards. Now, there's also something to be said about this being part of the circadian optimization in general, and so on and so forth. But now what I recently began is to maybe do the assault biking kind of in the middle of the stretching, in order to allow my body to kind of drive already into a H&N phase or into a relaxing phase, in order to be able to ramp up again afterwards more readily.